Jai. Hari Hari Bol. Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha, Girivaradhari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Jamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Girivaradhari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Jamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha, Girivaradhari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Jamuna Tiravanachari. Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol, Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. And as I usually like to read the translation to Radha Madhava, because sometimes we can forget what it means. Krishna is the lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Vraja and the holder of the great hill named Govardhana. He is the beloved son of Mother Yasoda, the delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja, and he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Jamuna. Nastapreshu Bhadreshu Nicham Bhagavate Sevaya Bhagavate Tamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Nashtaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Narayanam Namaskritta Naram Chaiva Narottanam Devim Sarasvatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Nara Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vasudeva, the author. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Ganangana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Dena Tasmaya Sri Gurave Namaha. Right, so today, welcome everyone to our daily reading of Bhagavatam. In many places in the world, same thing is happening, maybe different time zones. So we're reading text 38, correct? Actually, I'll read from here, it's easy for me to see. Tasmin alupta mahima priyayanurakto. Vidya daripi upatirna vapu vimane. Babraja utkacha kumud ganavana pichyas. Tarabi avita ivadu patina bhastaha. Tasmin alupta mahima priyayanurakto. Vidya daribi upatirna vapu vimane. Babraja utkacha kumud ganavana pichyas. Tarabi avritaivo dupatirna bastaha. Gentlemen? Tasmin alupta mahima priyayanurakto. Vidyadaripi upachena vapu vimane. Babracha utkacha kumudganavana pichyas. Tarabhi avritarivo dupatina bastaha. Ladies? Tasmin alupta mahima priyayanurakto. Vidyadaripi upachira vapu vimane. Babraja utkacha kumudganavana pichyas. Tarabi avritarivo dupatina bastaha. Thank you. So we'll go for the word. Tasmin. In that. Alupta. Not lost. Mahima. Glory. Priyaya. With his beloved consort. Anurakta. Attached. Vijayadharibhi. By the Gandharva girls. Upachirna. Waited upon. Vapu. His person. Vimane. On the airplane. Babraja. He shone. Utkacha. Open. Kumut Ganavan. The moon, which is followed by rows of lilies. Apicha. Very charming. Tarapi. By stars. Arita. Surrounded. Eva. As. Udupati. The moon, the chief of the stars. Nabastaha. In the sky. Would one of the ladies mind passing me the tissue box? Sorry. Translation. Though seemingly attached to his beloved consort, while served by the Gandharva girls, the sage did not lose his glory, which was mastery over his self. In the aerial mansion, Kadama Muni, with his consort, shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night. Please repeat after me. Though seemingly attached to his beloved consort, while served by the Gandharva girls, the sage did not lose his glory, which was mastery over his self. In the aerial mansion, Kadama Muni with his consort shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night. I was thinking about this translation when I was looking at the moon last night. I don't know if anyone had a chance to look at the moon, because we've had a full moon, but it just was so charming looking at the moon through this big tree I have in my backyard, and I was thinking about this verse. So today we're reading 3rd Canto, chapter 23, verse 38. Very short purport, but even though it's a very short purport, there's actually quite a lot of points hopefully I'll be able to talk about. The mansion was in the sky, and therefore the comparison to the full moon and stars is very beautifully composed in this verse. Can anyone remember how many stories the mansion had? 7. Kadama Muni looked like the full moon, and the girls who surrounded his wife, Devahuti, seemed just like the stars. On a full moon night, the stars and the moon together form a beautiful constellation. Similarly, in that aerial mansion in the sky, Kadama Muni, with his beautiful wife and the damsels surrounding them, appeared like the moon and stars on a full moon night. So it's a very beautiful, poetic translation, and the Sanskrit is also very beautiful. So here we're reading some more glorifications of the great yogi and great devotee Kadama Muni. And despite embracing household life, as we've been studying how he's changed his ashram to Grihastha, and we can see that he's, he married Swayambhu Manu's wife, very elevated, very wonderful yogini, beautifully qualified person, Devahuti, yet he remained very self-controlled. And that's the trick in Grihastha life, maintaining self-control. So what example did he set, do you think? Anyone? Kadama Muni. Rupa? Yes. Rupa replied that he set the example of a perfect, ideal Grihastha. So he illustrated the idea of Grihastha ashram as a legitimate and spiritually elevated stage of life when lived with detachment and devotion to the Lord. So I remember in the early days of Krishna consciousness, there were very few married people. Eventually, over time, devotees were getting married, but the poor Grihasthas had a bit of a bad rap. They were looked down upon by the brahmacharis and looked down upon by the sannyasis, which fortunately has changed, because the Grihasthas, they are actually the foundation of our movement, because they support the brahmacharis, they support the sannyasis, and they're establishing the ability to nurture and train beautiful children in Krishna consciousness. So although there's a short purport, as I said, there are quite a few points that we can discuss nonetheless. So one of the things that struck me was the adverb seemingly in the translation. So it's important, it's a subtle message, but it's very important because he seemingly appeared to be very attached, that he's performing a temporary role. So like an actor on the stage will take on different costumes or different roles. So we're asked in our lives sometimes to take on different roles. We might have the role of being a Grihastha, we might have the role of being a husband, we might have the role of being a wife, a mother, that we always understand that these are actually temporary. And, sometimes I have to catch myself because I'm so attached to my children and grandchildren. I have to think, well, in their previous life, they had a different mother and they have a different grandmother. And in the next life, if they have to take birth again, they'll have a different mother and a different grandmother. So we always have to catch ourselves that the role that we're doing is a temporary role, but it's a very important role. It's not that we're hypocritical or we don't take our position seriously. We do. It's not that I'm just pretending to love my husband or I'm just pretending to love my wife, but I don't actually. No, it's not like that. We have that devotion and we have that dedication, but we understand, okay, it's not going to last, well, maybe it might last the next life, because they say that when you circumambulate in the Vedic ceremony, when you get married, you go around 7 times. They say that for 7 lifetimes you were joined, which is very interesting. And another point that I found really interesting was relevant in the glories of performing austerities. So here Kadamba Muni is described that his glory was his mastery over self. And that's why our regulative principles are often referred to as the principles of freedom. And you might think, what does that mean, principles of freedom? I've got to control everything that I eat. I can only eat offered food. I can't drink tea, coffee, alcohol. I can't have illicit sex. I can't, what's the other one? Gamble. All of these things, but they're actually freeing us, because when we've got control of the senses, we're not pushed to, I've got to have my cup of coffee. And if you ever, in my working environment, everyone was like subsisting on their cups of coffee. First thing in the morning, they were drinking their coffee. At, mid-morning drinking coffee. It's no wonder anyone slept, because they were drinking so much coffee. So when you're not addicted to these things, they're actually liberating, and it's freeing us. And, you just take someone who's used to drinking coffee and you say, you can't have it anymore. They'll have physical repercussions. They'll get all shaky, they'll get headaches, and they're in really bad moods because their body is so addicted to getting that caffeine. So for devotees, we at least can control these senses, and by doing so, we're actually gaining mastery over the self by the grace of the Lord. And Kadamba Muni, even though he's got so many attributes he's enjoying in this beautiful 7-story mansion, but still he's detached. So the verse teaches us by example how we can live in the world, even surrounded by beauty and apparent luxury, and still remain untouched and make spiritual advancement. It's not that we all have to go around wearing sackcloth and ashes, or, living in very primitive environment. No, Prabhupada actually built all of these big temples for, not only for preaching, but for us. He said, how can I expect these boys and girls to live under a tree? They're used to luxury, they're used to comfortable environments. So Prabhupada created a very beautiful environment for us. The Brahmachari ashram is, I'm sure, very comfortable. You might be a bit squished in there, I'm not sure. And the Brahmacharini ashram, or the ladies' ashram, is very comfortable. Small but comfortable, and they have their own bathrooms. And Chambari no doubt would remember what it was like for us as Brahmacharinis. I don't know what Sydney was like, but in Melbourne was a small room with about 20 ladies in it, all crammed up, sleeping on mats, no mattresses and no pillows. So in yesterday's class, Padma mentioned that Devahuti, she was a yogini lakshana. So she was very powerful and very potent. And one gains some spiritual shakti by performance of austerities. But we want to be careful that we're not performing artificial austerities, or we're not renouncing artificially, because you can't maintain that artificial austerities. After a while, the senses will become stronger, because you're not at that stage where you can perform those kind of austerities. And I've told this story before, that in the early days in Mayapur, we had one American devotee who had arrived, and it was all pretty austere in those days anyway, but he was living in a little hut he'd erected out in the fields, and he would come to the deity kitchen in the afternoon, and he would take the vegetable peelings, the carrot peelings, the potato peelings, etc. And he would take those, and then after the offering had been made, that's what he ate. So I don't know whether he boiled it up to make a soup, or whether he just crunched on the peelings. And we were very naive, and we were thinking, this devotee is like, he's a pure devotee. He is so special. He's performing all of these austerities. And when Prabhupada was due to arrive in Mayapur, and we were thinking, oh, Prabhupada's going to be so pleased with this devotee. He's going to shower him with mercy that, this is someone who's so amazing in his austerities. And we're all thinking like that in our naivety. And then Prabhupada arrived, and he was walking down the stairs from his room in Mayapur, just before he would enter the temple room. And I was just standing at the foot of the stairs, a little distance. And this devotee came up to Prabhupada and tried to touch his feet. And Prabhupada actually was doing this kind of like back shuffle dance because he did not want this devotee to touch his feet. And we were really puzzled. We're thinking, what happened? This person is so special. What happened? And then 3 weeks later, that devotee was never seen again. He just disappeared, went back. I don't know whether he stayed in the temple or just went back. So his renunciation was artificial. He's not, like our 6 Goswamis. They had slept under a different tree every night so they wouldn't get attached to the same tree. And every alternate day they would have some butter or some buttermilk or something like that. But they were on that highly advanced platform, and we can't imitate that. And when we try and imitate that, we run into trouble. So Prabhupada's given us this swathe of austerities that we can follow, and we can follow them pretty easily. They actually feel good. It doesn't feel good if you wake up and you don't have a shower. It feels really awful. You don't have to have an icy cold shower, but you can have a coolish shower. So all of these things are actually doable austerities, and by performing them we get inspired and we get enthusiastic to perform our service. So Devahuti, she had the key traits of a great yogini or a yogi. She had faith, and she had guru bhakti, or devotion to her guru. So Devahuti had deep faith in the process of yoga, bhakti yoga, and she surrendered to her spiritual master, which was her husband, Kadamba Muni. And then she accepted her own son, Kapila Dev, who was an incarnation of Krishna, as her ultimate guru. So he was the one that gave her the Sankhya Yoga process. And it's not to be confused with the Sankhya Yoga process that is propounded by also a Kapila, but the atheistic Kapila. So we often distinguish between the two Kapilas by calling the incarnation of Krishna as the Bhagavan Kapila as Devahuti Putra, which means the son of Devahuti. And the other Kapila, he appeared later on at the same time. So both Kapilas, they expounded Sankhya philosophy, but the atheistic Kapila expounded it without understanding, perception, or realization of God. So he was a Mayavadi. So in the next chapter, Vishnu explains to Devahuti about her future. He says, "You shall have a son who will be the greatest among perfected beings. He will be the supreme personality of Godhead, the super soul of the entire universe, and a partial manifestation of my plenary portion. He will be celebrated throughout the 3 worlds." So this is the amazing thing that Devahuti, she's so elevated that she is the mother of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his incarnation as Kapila Dev. So she's very exceptional. And the other thing that struck me about this particular translation is its poetry. It's very poetic, like the moon and the metaphors of the moon and the lilies, and you can just imagine how beautiful a sight that would be. And throughout Bhagavatam and all of our scriptures, you'll actually find beautiful incidences of poetry. And it's a really nice exercise you might want to do when you're reading, is just have a little book to write down those particular verses that are so poetic and evoke a certain mood when you're reading them. It's nice to have a little collection of those beautiful words because they're elegant and they're very insightful. So we can also meditate on the description that the Brahma Samhita gives us about the spiritual world, where every step is a dance, where every word is a song. So throughout the Bhagavatam, the other scriptures, there's this beautiful poetic language. And these are delicate nuances of the spiritual atmosphere. So it's not clumsy, it's not rough, it's very, very beautifully composed. And even in Vraj, so I was looking up in 10th Canto, chapter 11, verse 53, Prabhupada writes about the practice of the inhabitants of Vraja. And what they would do, they would actually compose poetry about Krishna's pastimes. So Mother Yasoda, she would compose poetry about Krishna killing the various demons that would come and attack him and the cowherd boys. And she would sing these while she's churning the butter or she's rolling the chapatis. She would be singing about these glories of Krishna. And they would sing, it describes there in 10th Canto, that they would sing them very loudly, which must have been very beautiful. And in 9th chapter of 10th Canto, it's described that as she churned the butter, she remembered the childhood activities of Krishna, and she composed those songs, and she enjoyed singing them. And it's very nice that when we're performing our service, that we can chant at the same time. While you're making garlands, or you can listen to a lecture, or you can chant. If you're learning verses, you can have your verses there on your index cards. And later on in the class, I'll give some tips from Radhika Ramana about how to learn verses. So Mother Yasoda put into poetry form all these beautiful activities of Krishna, such as the killing of Aghasura and Trinavarta. And then while churning the butter or going about her household chores, she would sing about these pastimes. And then all the verses in Bhagavatam, they have a certain chanda or meter. And there are many different kinds of meters. And they evoke a certain mood. So they're just not random, oh, okay, well, we'll chant it in this meter because that's the only meter the words fit. They're particularly designed that way. And if you're interested in the theory or the information about this, there's a beautiful class by Radhika Ramana Prabhu, our PhD devotee, and he gives, any of his lectures are fantastic, but one I was listening to recently is about Sanskrit, and he's talking about these different chandas and the meters and how people recited the verses. And when the teacher was teaching the students, he would have the hand movements going up and then going down. And Radhika Ramana was describing sometimes they would get the head of their students and then move their head when verses meant to go up or down like this. So in that way, they could remember very well. And he was also explaining how the oral tradition was actually very potent because not only did people have good memories, but the way they recited the mantras. And they would often do this in groups of, say, 10 brahmanas. So they would be reciting the Vedas, for example. And if one of the brahmanas was out by, a syllable or a beat, then that would be immediately revealed to all of the other people in the recitation group. So they'd go out, get back to Sanskrit class. So it's very interesting how they did it. And because sound is such a powerful element, it's like when a mother carries a child in her womb. The child is developing hearing her voice. And for devotees, we will often read out loud Srimad Bhagavatam. So our children, our babies, the embryos would be hearing that transcendental sound vibration. It's a very common practice. And then when the baby's born, he can't see, can't recognize his mother, but he recognizes her by her voice. So that sound is such an important element of our lives and also of our spiritual life. Excuse me. Chanting our rounds, how are we chanting our rounds with attention? Are we actually trying to listen? And then our monkey minds, they take us away. And then we've got to remember, okay, I've got to pull that monkey mind back. Sometimes I'll chant a whole round and I'll go, hang on a second, where was I? I was off somewhere else. So it's a practice. And even after chanting, for a long time, still we've got to keep really trying to hear that sound vibration, because it's so integral to our spiritual life. We don't do anything kind of nonchalantly. We do it with focus and we do it with attention, but we try to keep our cortisol levels down so we're not stressing out. So, because Vedic knowledge was transmitted orally, chandas, or the meters, ensured precision in sound, pronunciation, and rhythm. So the rhythm, we're hardwired with rhythm. Man, mana, bhava, mad, bhakto, it's that rhythm that helps us remember. And that makes memorization and preservation very reliable. And something that Radhika Ramana Prabhu was saying in his lecture, he was saying that actually when the sastras started to get written down, he said often flaws would appear because they have their manuscript there and then they'd be transcribing it, copying it there. And then there's such a thing as eye skip. So say, for example, they're reading, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they write that down. And then they look up, and 4 lines down, there's also a Supreme Personality of Godhead there. So then they start writing from that point. So it can be a little bit, mistakes can appear through this eye skip. But in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, it's very perfect. There aren't those mistakes. But Radhika Ramana was giving an example. He'd been checking different translations of Mahabharata. And he said the South Indian translation of Mahabharata has the story of Satyavati and Parashara Muni quite differently. Because in the North Indian Mahabharata, you know the story that she conceived Vyasadeva before marriage through this great Muni. But in the South Indian one, they actually went to a little island and there was a temporary marriage performed because they just couldn't accept the fact that Satyavati would conceive Vyasadeva, the composer of the compiler of the Vedas, in such a way. So there's those variations are there. But Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, no problem. That was very interesting points he made. So these chandas or meters, they're not only aesthetic, but they're also deeply functional in conveying the rasa or the emotion, memory, rhythm, and spiritual power. So different meters stir or suit different moods or different deities or purposes in the sastra. And there's lots of different ones. I won't go into all of that. It's very kind of complex, and because I don't know I can't give you examples of the different meters, like the Ostob meter, I can't give you an example of it, so I'll leave that to the more studious people. So the oral process used various kinds of techniques, and Vedic Sanskrit had a tonal quality to it. Each syllable a pitch, generally 3 tones, and then they would vary. And then they would extend to 5 and then 8. So there's the meter, which we're hardwired to rhythm, and the metrical pattern helps us to remember things better. Then there's the tone, Then there's the bodily movements, and I mentioned how the teacher would, he'd be moving his hand up and down, or he'd be moving the students' heads, and then they're recited in that group setting of 10 brahmanas, and then they could detect if they'd made a mistake. So Radhika Ramana gave some good tips on how to memorize verses. He said, always sing them. Don't just go like you're reading a line. You have the meter there. That helps with remembrance. So you always sing them, so the metrical pattern will help in that way. And then by doing this, you feel the rhythm. So the rhythm will also help you remember. And then he said, recite the verses, or when you're learning a verse, in different places. Don't just go and say, okay, well, this is my desk, and this is where I learn my verses. He said that you do it in different places. So I always recommend that, I used to have index cards where they have the verses on them, and then I just carry them with me. When I was standing at the bus stop, I'd be looking at them, or when I'd be walking, I'd be looking at them. So you're just in different places, so it becomes more of a holistic memorization. And then the other thing he said, review your verses. So when I was a Bhaktin in Calcutta Temple, our dear God Sister Narayani, she would learn a verse. She knows many, probably more than 1,000 verses. She knows many verses, but she would always, as she was getting ready, she would always be learning a verse, and then she'd be reviewing all the verses that she had learned. So she'd sit there and review everything, and then, she'd learn a new one. So the memorization is a habit that you can pick up. I find it really hard to learn a verse now. I just don't have the memory for it. But the verses I learned 30 years ago, I still remember because I had them so drummed into my head. So, and learning verses is very, very important because Prabhupada said that we should substantiate everything by a reference to Sastra. So if you listen to a Prabhupada, not if you do, when you listen to Prabhupada's classes, he will cite many verses, and when you read his purports, he's always referring to other parts of the scripture. So, circling back to the verse we just read, with its elegant language, beautifully describing Kadama Muni. Kadama Muni, with his consort, shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night. So this poetic imagery is really wonderful, and it does help us focus on the significance of Vyadavyasa's descriptions of the Lord and his associates. So when we're reading, we come across these beautiful things. We come across descriptions of Krishna's hands, his feet, how his toenails are like shining moons. Can you imagine Krishna's lotus feet and the soft palms of the devotees and Krishna and his rosy feet? And one nice description I came across in 3rd canto. Krishna's hands and lotus feet are like fully bloomed lotuses, soft and luminous, dispelling the heat of material suffering. His toenails are described as more radiant than the moon. It's a really nice form of meditation. You can just think about that. And Prabhupada told Jananivas, and Jananivas told me personally, that Prabhupada said you can pray to the Lord in your own language. It doesn't have to be in Sanskrit. You can offer prayers of glorification when you're standing there in Darshanati. You can offer prayers in your mind. When you come here in the day, you can offer prayers that you've composed. It doesn't have to be in a Sanskrit meter. And Prabhupada also encouraged us to write. He always wanted us to write. And I'd been reading the Lilamrita, which was talking about this typewriter that had been stolen from Prabhupada. And you know how we know there's gold and we know there's a mountain, and in our dreams we put the gold, there's a gold mountain. So usually when the spiritual master appears to you in a dream, you take it very seriously. But because I had been reading about this particular thing in Lilamrita, when I had this dream, which I'm about to tell you about, I didn't take it that, yes, that was an order by Srila Prabhupada. But he did tell us to write. So in this dream, Prabhupada said to me, called me over and he said, Krishnarupa, I have a typewriter in America, a very old typewriter in America. I want you to go to America, find that typewriter, and I want you to write on it. And when you're writing, I want you to say some funny things. So when I woke up, I thought, oh, that's an awesome dream, but I know that Prabhupada wasn't instructing me I should go to America, find the typewriter, and type on the typewriter. But it was an encouragement that reminded me, rather, that Prabhupada wanted us all to write down our realizations. And we can start by writing, that keeping a track of those verses that particularly strike us in their poetic language to help us glorify the Lord. And this is a nice thing I found about the dreams. And this is reference from Memories, Anecdotes of a Modern Day Saint by Siddhanta Das. And I'll read this out. Although it was devastating when you first saw Prabhupada's deteriorated physical condition, after you were with him for a while, you got used to it. When devotees saw him in that condition for the first time, they'd cry. And we'd all start crying, seeing these devotees crying. I can't look at any pictures or videos of Prabhupada on his last days. I just can't. I just cannot do it. At one point, Prabhupada said, "Why are you all crying?" We said, "Prabhupada, we're crying because you're so sick and we are afraid that you may leave." Prabhupada said, "I will never leave you. I live forever in my books, so there's no reason to cry. Old people die, that is natural. When a young person dies, there's some mistake, because a young person should live until he's old. When he's old, he should die. For me, it's a natural thing, so don't cry." One devotee said, "But Prabhupada, we're crying because we can't be without you. And when you leave, we don't know how to communicate with you." Prabhupada said, "I will communicate with you through your heart. I will come to you in your dreams. I will communicate with you through dreams as Chaitya Guru." And Chaitya Guru is the super soul in our hearts. So that was such a beautiful thing that I discovered there. So in describing my typewriter dream, I'm not presuming Prabhupada gave me a specific instruction for the reasons that I gave you. But in general, when the spiritual master does appear to you in a dream, we do take it seriously. And there's also a very nice story that the Lord gives us instructions even while we're wide awake. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but there was a devotee in Mayapur that she was having trouble with her eyesight. And she was praying to Lord Nrsingadev, "Lord Nrsingadev, please help me." And he said, and she heard this voice. And the voice said, very sweet, beautiful voice said, "I want my eyes back." And she was like, "Am I going crazy? Am I thinking that this is Lord Nrsingadev saying something to me?" So she ignored it and went back to her prayer. But the voice spoke a second time, "I want my eyes back." Attempting again to disregard this message, she didn't know what to do. And then the voice said, "Go to the pujari." So she thought, if the pujaris think I'm crazy, well, I might lose a bit of my false ego, but it's okay. So she went to Jananivas. Jananivas said, "Go speak to Pankajangri Prabhu," who at that time was Nrsingadev's pujari. And then somehow she felt that she couldn't do any more about this. So the following day, as she approached Lord Nrsingadev, her mind buzzed with doubt. What if that voice was just my mind and I'm developing schizophrenia or something? Demanding that, the Lord heal my eyes, which had been very painful for a number of weeks. So then the voice again spoke to her, "You will get your eyes back when I get mine." She felt overwhelmed
he didn't want those eyes. He wanted his red eyes back, which is such an amazing story. So, and what happened was, actually, once the Nrsimhadev deity got his red eyes back, her eyesight actually was cured. So it's got this amazing pastime of Lord Nrsimhadev and this very happy devotee. So going back to poetic descriptions, and we're closing up now. So Prabhupada also wrote many beautiful poems and descriptions of the Lord. We have the beautiful prayers of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Narottam Das Thakur. They all glorified the Lord in beautiful, beautiful, beautiful language. And Prabhupada's very famous poem he wrote in English, actually, on board the Jaladuta, Makine Bhagavat Dhamma, about teaching Krishna consciousness in America. And, you know, he was, one beautiful line there, he was saying, I'm just a puppet in your hands, make me dance, make me dance, make me dance. Such a beautiful thing. So there seems to be some contradictions in the verse, that he's attached, but seemingly attached. So in Bhagavad Gita 5.8.9, it says, a person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all. Because while speaking, evacuating, receiving or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with their objects and that he is aloof from them. And that he is aloof from him is the Atma, who we really are. And that's such a difficult concept. When you meditate on it, you think, I'm actually not this, I'm not my mind, I'm not my intellect, I'm actually something other. I'm that spiritual spark that's glorious, full of knowledge. What are we full of? Bliss. And what else? Eternality, thank you. That's how far away I am from the realization. I forget what I really am. So, you know, when we start meditating on that, it's pretty amazing. And, you know, we may be a long way from having that realization. But if we follow in the footsteps of the Acharyas, follow through the Prabhupada, we will get to that point. So we've got this beautiful imagery, and we can, as a final reflection, we can think about Kadamba Muni. Despite his, you know, environment, he's still very devoted. He's very fixed on his service to the Lord, his remembrance of the Lord. And it shows that spiritual perfection is not something that's confined to caves or forests. It can shine in any place. And when I was 12 years old, I was convinced that I was either going to be a Buddhist nun or a Carmelite nun. I'd either be meditating in a cave in the Himalayas somewhere, or a Carmelite nun. It's a particular order that doesn't speak. They take silence and they talk at particular times. And anyone who knows me knows that I like to talk, so that would have been a very difficult thing to do. So we can have our lives that are natural, that are wholesome, and full of joyous austerity, coming together in the temple, singing together, chanting together, eating prasadam together, getting up early, taking a bath, focusing on the Lord. It's a very blissful life. It's actually very blissful. So, live in the world, but not be totally immersed or taken over by it. Always having that consciousness and that understanding that this world is given to us by Krishna. How can I use it? How can I use this gift to promote Srila Prabhupada's mission? How can I use the gift to give that to other people? You know, we have very nice opportunities here with so many guests coming. can always speak to them, make them feel happy, welcome, comfortable. So the glory is in the inner mastery. It's not what we own, what kind of car we drive. It's nothing to do with that. So thank you very much for listening. And so Kadama Muni encourages us not to escape the world, but to transform it from within through our purity, presence, and practice. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Any corrections, comments? Rupa Prabhu?
So Kadama Muni was, he was a perfect Vaishnava, pure Nityasiddha devotee, perfect yogi, with all the mystic cities, but ultimately, the greatest yogic perfection was his bhakti yoga, and also perfect grihastha. And he's married to Devahuti, and they're in this wonderful mansion, travelling all throughout the universe constantly, and they have the nine daughters and Lord Kapila, one son. And you were saying, he's always in remembrance of the Lord and engaged in service. Does it give a description of his particular services that he was engaged in?
No, not that I've read.
Yeah.
But it would have been meditation. It's in Satya Yuga, so it would have been meditation on the Lord.
Yeah.
Can't offer anything else.
Okay. And just you were talking about the six Goswamis and how they were, very detached, living under a different tree every night. And obviously, us as aspiring devotees, aspiring grihasthas or whatever ashram we're in. No, we're living in one place, so probably we're very, very attached. But there was a story where Prabhupada was walking with his disciples, and they were walking somewhere, out in a park, and under a tree they see this lump of bird droppings. And Prabhupada was asking the devotees, what do you think this means? And all the devotees are speculating, like what it means. And Prabhupada comes up with the answer, says, no, what it means is that the bird is living on one branch and he's very attached. He's living on the same branch, so the droppings are dropping in the same place.
And there's, in our temple that we had in Burnett Street, it was just a kind of little courtyard at the back, but with no greenery or anything. But there's this one skinny tree, like it had a few leaves on it. And Prabhupada said that tree was the previous owner who died, and he was so attached to the house he took birth as this little skinny tree. So it's very interesting. And sorry, go on. No, you go.
Prabhupada also gives an example of a big businessman who's got a big company, big factories, and he's very attached, and all the workers very reverential to him. But then he passes away, and after he passes away, as many people do, they still have a picture of that previous manager on the wall. They're still offering respect. So they've still got the picture of him on the wall, but in his next life, because he's so attached, he's come back as a cockroach in the same building, and someone sees him in the hallway and squishes him, not realizing he was the previous. So Prabhupada's saying that's what can happen,
Yes.
Big person, but in your next life could be the cockroach in the same building.
Yes, really good pastimes there. Thank you, Rupa. So we want to be attached to the things that are going to save us, not make us come back. Anything else? Jayapradha?
Hare Krishna, thank you so much. There's always so many enlightening points from your classes. I really appreciate. I loved, it particularly stuck out how you said glory is in the inner mastery, not so much the car we drive or anything like that. And I was just reflecting, I had a really nice talk earlier with a wonderful devotee about like the pure devotee syndrome of kind of like how we can only see things when we've been through them ourselves. More, we were just reflecting that, you know, there's that Rumi poem, the more the heart breaks and cracks, the more light can get in. And if I see the most advanced devotees, they're always very open, friendly, smiley, like that class you gave, very light, and it's this inner alchemy. And I was just reflecting on that point, that the inner alchemy, inner mastery of circumstance. Like, so the yogi is equipoised in discomfort and happiness and distress, and I'm just kind of elaborating in thoughts on that comment that you made and reflection on life, you know. And I was in Harvey Bay visiting my mum. She was unwell, that's why I'm back in Australia. And you know, you'd see all these like gym guys. They were the strongmen. They'd lift like 200 kilogram rocks and stuff, and they all had these really nice cars, and they'd work on the mines and stuff, but it was all on loan. And you see them kind of like puffed up with the identifications rather than, you know, a genuine kind of, I mean, because like we really have to, I feel like from my experience or just looking around, and I'm very still limited in experience, but like we really get the power, the strength, the grace from like not from the identification with the props or who we think we are.
Yeah, it's nice points. Very nice points. Thank you for giving us those points. And you touched on the pure devotee syndrome, and that's something that we have to be wary of, because, you know, our tendency is that we do some little austerity or something and we become puffed up about it.
It's not attractive, and it,
you know,
like doesn't connect you with people. With hearts of Krishna's devotees.
And another thing, also, when we're doing some austerities, like maybe on a Kodashi, you want to do an extra austerity, or on a special day, you never tell anyone. Because if you tell anyone, then the punya or the devotional credits you're getting will be dispelled. I mean, if someone asks you, that's one thing, but you don't go around going, I'm going to chant 64 rounds today, or I'm not going to have any water today, or I'm going to not eat anything today. That's not beneficial for you. If you want to perform extra austerities, just keep it to yourself, and then you'll get the full benefit. And, you know, that whole, like, having this pure devotee syndrome is also, there's that element of judgment, because then you're judging other people. Oh, well, they don't do what I do, therefore they're not as good as me, which means I'm much better than everyone else. They're all big traps that Maya places before us. And
thank you.
We all fall into those traps. So we've got to be alert and very introspective. Always, like, I'm not saying be cerebral and in your head, but examine yourself. Examine, okay, well, I react like this when this happens. Oh, that's because I'm puffed up. Or that's because, you know, we're always trying to learn by situations that Krishna presents to us. Anyway, I'm over time. Sorry, Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much.
Haribol.
Points.
Thank you for listening.